Hello and welcome to another episode of DAX in 10. In today's episode, we're going to look at how you can display the drill-through filter values on a drill-through page by using DAX to produce dynamic labels. If you haven't come across the drill-through filter feature yet, check out the first episode of my series on using Power BI. In this episode, I look at what drill-through filters are, why you might want to use them in your report, and I'll also take you through an example of adding some drill-through filters to an existing Power BI report. Okay, so I'm going to show you a couple of different ways that you can produce dynamic labels. One is a more simpler variation, and that's going to be using the if and has one value functions. And then we're going to refactor that to use the selected value function, which is a slightly newer function into DAX. And then I'm going to move on to a more complicated example, and that's going to use all of these functions here. So is blank, count rows, top n, except, all, and concatenate x. And that's based on a technique that was outlined in a blog post by Chris Webb. There he's creating dynamic chart titles, but it's the same thing as we're trying to do for displaying our drill-through filter values. I'll put the link there, and I shall also put the link to that blog post in the notes for this episode. Both examples that I'll be showing today will make use of DAX variables. If you've not used DAX variables yet, then check out the previous episode of DAX in 10 where I shall go through what DAX variables are and how you can use them within your code. Okay, so here's the Power BI report that we're going to be working with. It's got two pages on it. It's got a summary page here, and then we've got the drill through page that we're actually going to be drilling through down to from our summary page. Got a couple of drill through filters onto this page, so one for product category, one for manufacturer. And I'm actually going to start off by showing you how you can display the values that are being passed down without having to use DAX. And I'm actually doing that by using a couple of tables. So I've got one table here for the product category and one table for the manufacturer. So as you'll see when I go back to sales category, we drill down first on computers. So that's showing the filter valued in the first table, so for computers, and then in my second table, obviously we're now filtering down on all the manufacturers or only the manufacturers that are producing products within the computers product category. If we go back to the summary page, and we'll drill through down using this table here, and this is obviously going to pass through, this time going to pass through product category and manufacturer as drill through filters. And again, as expected, it's now just displaying cameras and camcorders in our product category table, and Fabricam as the manufacturer in our manufacturers table. So that's all well and good, but there's two problems that I have with this. One is that the tables are taking up valuable real estate on your report page, and two, you can't add any additional formatting or wording around these drill through filter values. So as you'll see in a minute, when I use DAX measures, I'm actually going to be adding some wording. It makes it that they make more sense on the report page as titles. Okay, so you can see now that I've deleted the two tables that I had before. That's immediately given me a bit more room to expand the size of this chart. And I've replaced those two tables with a couple of card visuals. So I've got one here for the product category that's getting passed through, and one here for the manufacturer or manufacturers that are getting passed through. So if you're drilling through from the summary page, you'll only ever pass through one product category, but you could be passing through one or multiple manufacturers. So these card visuals are being populated by a couple of measures that I've created. So let's take a look at those. We'll start off with the simpler one, which is the selected product measure. So starting off here, so this is the DAX code for the selected product measure. I'm starting off by defining a variable called selected product, and all I'm doing there is checking to see whether the selected product has one value only. If it has, it passes that one value back into the selected product variable. If not, it leaves it blank. That then goes on down to the main bit of the code, again using an if function to check to see whether that selected product variable is blank. If it is, it will use the text for all categories. If not, it will concatenate the word for with that one selected product. Now with the July 2017 release of the Power BI desktop, we can actually replace that section of DAX code that I'm using to populate the selected product variable with a new function called selected value. And what that does is replaces the whole if has one value section of DAX code. Makes it much simpler to makes the syntax much simpler to understand. And there's a blog post over on sqlbi.com that explains how that works. I'll put a link to that in the show notes for this episode. So let's go back over and try to refactor our code now. So we go to the selected product measure, and I can actually replace this whole if has one value with the selected value function. Rid of that, and I can get rid of that bit of code there. And that now simplifies my measure even further. Okay, we can now go and test that out. So let's just see whether that's working okay. So with nothing selected in terms of the product category drill through filter, it displays the text for all categories. If I go in there and select one of them, so say audio, it should just say for audio. Same for cameras and camcorders, cell phones, and so on. Okay, so now let's take a look at the measure for selected manufacturer. And as you can see, there's a bit more to this one than there was for the selected product measure. And that's because with the product category, we're only passing through one value, whereas for the manufacturer, we can be passing through one value or multiple values, depending on the product category selected. And to get that formatted into a nice label takes a bit more DAX code. As I said earlier, the DAX I'm using for this measure is based on that outlined in a blog post by Chris Webb, and you can find a link to that blog post in the show notes for this episode. Okay, so I think the best way to do this is to step through this code line by line, and for me to try and explain what each line of DAX is doing. So we start off at the top here with our variable definitions, and the first one is defining the selected manufacturers. So that's bringing back a list of selected manufacturers, so that what we've got filtered down in terms of manufacturers. Based on the product category that we've selected. That's using the values function, and the values function returns a one-column table that contains the distinct values from the specified table or column. So in this case, the manufacturer column in the product table. The next variable is defining the number of selected manufacturers, so basically returning the number of manufacturers as defined in the previous step. Then we're defining the number of possible manufacturers in the product table, so that's using the all function, and the all function returns all the rows in the table or all the values in a column and ignores any filters that have been applied. So that's going to take off the filter that would have been applied by the product category selection to give us all the manufacturers in the product table. Then we're using the top n function, which returns the top n rows of a specified table to define all but the last selected manufacturer. So in that in the variable we defined in the first step for selected manufacturers is going to take all of those bar the last one. And then the last variable definition here is for the last selected manufacturer, so that's going to use the except function, which returns the rows of one table which do not appear in another. So here we're using the list of manufacturers returned in the selected manufacturers variable and comparing that to the all but last selected manufacturer variable. So both of those variables contain a table list of manufacturers, and that's using the except function there to find out what is the last selected manufacturer in the list. Okay, so then we move on to the next section, which is the DAX that actually defines the measure. The first line here is an if statement, and that's checking that the number of selected manufacturers is 0 or not, and if it is, it will just give me a blank and pass that back into the selected manufacturers measure. If not, it will start by defining the label and starting that off with manufactured by. The next step checks to see whether the number of selected manufacturers is equal to the number of possible manufacturers, and then if it is, it then adds to my label the wording all manufacturers. So at this stage, if the number of selected manufacturers is equal to the number of possible manufacturers, I'm going to end up with a label that says manufactured by all manufacturers. If not, it then goes through to see whether the number of selected manufacturers is 1. If it is, then it will add a blank to my label. If not, it will then step through and basically use the concatenate x function, and that concatenates the result of an expression evaluated for each row in a table. So it's basically passing in the variable all but last selected manufacturers. So that's a table which has a list of all the manufacturers that are selected bar the last one, and it will then basically form a comma separated list of all of those manufacturers and add that to my label. It then adds the word and it will then add on to that label the last selected manufacturer that we defined in our variable last selected manufacturer. So essentially what I end up then with is a label that says manufactured by, then a comma separated list of all the manufacturers bar the last one, then the word and then the last manufacturer. Okay, so now we can take a look at the dynamic label in operation. So starting out with no product category selected, I just get manufactured by and then all manufacturers. If I select, say for example here, the audio product category, I get manufactured by, then a comma separated list of manufacturers bar the last one, then the word and then the last manufacturer in the list. Same for cameras and camcorders, cell phones, etc. And we go back to page 1 and select our drill through operation here for cell phones. So in this chart here, it's taking through cell phones as the drill through value. So I should get back the manufacturers associated with that product category. If I go back to page 1 again and select from my table this time, I should get the product category and then just the manufacturer as listed in the table. So let's try that, and yeah, that's working correctly as well. So hopefully that's given you an idea of how you can use dynamic labels for displaying your drill through filters, and those techniques are also applicable for dynamic labels on charts or tables or wherever you want to use them. So yeah, useful techniques there. Okay, so that's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed learning DAX with DAX in 10. If you did, then please give me a big thumbs up, and please feel free to leave a comment. If you want to find out when the next episode of DAX in 10 is available, or if you want to support the channel, then please consider subscribing. Until the next time, thanks for watching.